The cool breath of autumn swept through downtown Dallas, Texas, rustling the leaves that clung stubbornly to the sleek, modern sidewalks. The sun hung low, casting a golden haze over the city's towering glass buildings. Among them stood Sterling Financial, a beacon of prestige and quiet wealth. Its massive windows gleamed under the morning light, reflecting the bustle of early business traffic. Inside, the atmosphere was a careful orchestration of professionalism, the rich scent of polished wood mingling with the faint aroma of expensive cologne, voices lowered to murmurs, and shoes clicking crisply against glossy floors. Clients moved with purpose, dressed in tailored suits and elegant dresses, speaking in practiced tones as they discussed mortgages, investments, and wealth management strategies. The bank was designed to impress, and it did so effortlessly. At precisely 9:15 a.m., Jonathan Ellis stepped through the revolving glass doors, blending almost seamlessly into the stream of clientele. Clad simply in a crisp white button-down shirt, khaki trousers, and spotless white sneakers, he cut a figure of relaxed refinement. His closely trimmed beard and calm, intelligent gaze hinted at a man who knew exactly who he was and had no need to announce it. Yet to the casual observer, Jonathan appeared no different from any other middle-class professional handling personal errands. Before the day spiraled into meetings and deadlines, no one inside Sterling Financial that morning recognized him as the founder and CEO of Ellis Holdings, a conglomerate whose fingers touched industries from green energy to private equity. Few would have guessed that this soft-spoken man commanded billions in assets, including one of the largest private investment portfolios the very bank they stood in managed. Jonathan preferred it that way. Titles, after all, rarely protected a man from assumptions made at first glance. Moving with the easy assurance of a regular customer, Jonathan approached the queue leading to the teller counters. As he waited, his eyes drifted over the scene with quiet observation. At a nearby window, a middle-aged white man in an impeccable charcoal blazer was finalizing a transaction. The teller, a young woman with bright red lipstick and a gleaming nameplate that read Heather Collins, laughed at something the man said. She handed him a thick envelope stuffed with what Jonathan estimated to be at least $30,000 in cash. No extra forms, no second ID checks, no delay. Just smiles, thanks, and a polite nod toward the exit. Jonathan tilted his head slightly but said nothing. This wasn't new to him. He had witnessed the quiet differences, the subtle barriers, the unspoken rules long before he built his empire. But today was not the day to confront ghosts. Today was supposed to be simple. A straightforward withdrawal of $25,000 from his personal account, intended as a gift for his niece's university tuition, something he wanted to hand-deliver later that afternoon. His turn came swiftly. Jonathan stepped up to the counter, sliding his bank card and ID across the polished surface with an easy smile. Heather Collins, now standing before him, glanced briefly at his face, then down at the card. The warmth she had shown the previous customer disappeared. Her expression shifted into one of mechanical efficiency. Her lips pressed into a thin, unreadable line. Without a word of greeting, she slid a clipboard toward him with a curt flick of her fingers. "Fill this out," she said, her voice devoid of the casual friendliness she had so easily offered just moments earlier. Jonathan's smile remained polite, though a flicker of disappointment touched his eyes. He picked up the pen and filled out the standard withdrawal slip with swift, practiced strokes. Name, account number, amount, purpose. He signed at the bottom, as required, and slid the clipboard back across the counter. Heather took the form but barely spared a glance at it. She looked at the amount, then at Jonathan, then back at the form, as if something about the transaction didn't sit right with her. Setting the clipboard down, she folded her arms across her chest and tapped one finger against the counter. "We can't process this," she said flatly. Jonathan's brow furrowed slightly. "Excuse me?" Heather didn't blink. "Large cash withdrawals require additional authorization. I'm afraid we can't do it right now." Jonathan kept his tone even. "I just watched a gentleman leave with $30,000 in cash, without any additional forms, without any questions." Heather's jaw tensed, but she shrugged, an almost imperceptible movement that spoke volumes. "That was different," she said stiffly. Jonathan tilted his head again, studying her with the patient calm of a man who had climbed over far higher walls than this one. Different how? He asked, the question soft but loaded. Heather didn't answer. Instead, she shot a glance toward the glass-walled manager's office at the back of the lobby. Behind the clear pane stood Michael Reeves, the branch manager, a man in his early 40s wearing a navy suit and a look of barely concealed disdain. He was watching the exchange with interest, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. Jonathan followed her gaze, and in that moment, understood exactly what kind of morning this would be. Heather cleared her throat, tapping the withdrawal slip against the counter as if trying to buy time. Jonathan said nothing. He didn't need to. The weight of the moment was already pressing down on the space between them, silent but undeniable. Finally, she straightened her shoulders and said, "One moment, sir. I need to involve my manager." Without waiting for a reply, she turned sharply and marched toward the office where Michael Reeves stood, his watchful eyes never leaving Jonathan. The two exchanged a few quiet words behind the glass. Jonathan could see Michael's mouth tighten, his hand waving dismissively toward the counter, signaling something swift, decisive. Heather nodded once, briskly, then turned back. As she approached, Jonathan already knew what was coming. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, her voice coated with a brittle layer of artificial professionalism. "We'll need you to accompany us to a private office to further verify your account and the purpose of your withdrawal." Jonathan's jaw set. He forced a small smile to his lips. "Is that your standard procedure for withdrawals of this size?" Heather faltered just a second, enough to reveal the crack in her polished facade. "For unusual transactions," she hedged. Jonathan leaned slightly forward, his voice still calm, still maddeningly composed. "And it's unusual, because why?" Heather's mouth opened, then closed. She blinked and looked over her shoulder toward Michael, who was already on his way over, his steps quick, his expression clipped with impatience. "Is there a problem here?" Michael asked, addressing Heather without even glancing at Jonathan. "No, sir," she said, almost too quickly. "I was just explaining that." Michael cut her off with a small gesture, finally shifting his gaze to Jonathan, the way one might glance at a stain on an otherwise clean floor. "We can't process your withdrawal at the counter," Michael said shortly. "Security protocols." Jonathan tilted his head. "Protocols that didn't apply to the last customer?" Michael's nostrils flared, a subtle sign of annoyance. "I'm not at liberty to discuss other customers." "Of course," Jonathan said, his voice low, almost amused. "Convenient." Michael stiffened. "If you'd like to wait in a private room, we'll have someone come verify your account details." "And if I decline?" Michael's mouth thinned into a humorless smile. "Then I'm afraid we'll have to ask you to leave." There it was, the familiar choice: submit quietly to humiliation or resist and be treated like a threat. Jonathan exhaled through his nose, feeling the old anger stir deep in his chest. Not a wild, reckless anger, but the cold, cutting kind that had driven him to build his empire brick by brick. He straightened to his full height, adjusting his sleeves calmly. "Fine," he said. "Bring security if you must." Michael's eyes narrowed ever so slightly, and without another word, he turned and gave a sharp nod to a uniformed security guard standing by the entrance. A thick-set man, probably in his late 30s, bald, with a neatly trimmed beard and the kind of posture that suggested he was just waiting for a reason to escalate. The guard, whose name tag read Sean, approached quickly. Without introduction, he positioned himself next to Jonathan, the implication clear. "Sir, I'm gonna have to ask you to come with me," Sean said, his hand resting lightly on the radio, clipped to his belt. The customers nearby, those neatly dressed men and women who moments ago had been discussing investment returns and luxury vacations, shifted awkwardly. Some pretended not to notice, others watched with barely hidden curiosity. No one intervened. No one questioned. It was easier that way. Jonathan felt the weight of their gazes, the collective judgment, the silent assumptions wrapping around him like heavy chains. He kept his voice light, almost conversational. "And if I refuse?" Sean's hand twitched toward his belt. "Then we'll escort you out, sir." Jonathan offered a tight smile. "Go ahead." Sean hesitated just half a heartbeat too long. Then, taking the hesitation as permission, he reached out. The next few seconds stretched painfully slow, the security guard gripping Jonathan's arm, The sharp rasp of friction between jacket fabric and skin, the startled gasps from nearby customers as the confrontation unfolded publicly, shamelessly. Jonathan did not resist. He stood still, letting Sean's heavy hand press him toward the exit. Past the marbled counters, past the gold-lettered mission statements on the wall about integrity and respect. The polished veneer of professionalism shattered with every step. At the door, Sean gave a final shove that made Jonathan stumble slightly onto the sidewalk. The morning breeze, cooler now, brushed against his skin like a sudden slap. Behind the gleaming glass, Jonathan saw Heather hurriedly turning her attention back to the next customer. Michael Reeves smoothed his blazer, already pretending he hadn't just orchestrated one of the most embarrassing moments in Sterling Financial's recent history. Jonathan bent slowly, deliberately, to pick up his ID and bank card, which Sean had tossed to the ground in an almost casual act of disdain. His fingers brushed the rough pavement, but his dignity remained untouched. As he straightened up, he noticed a man standing nearby, an older white gentleman holding a smartphone low at his side, the recording light blinking steadily. Mark Ellison, a respected journalist for the Dallas Morning Chronicle, known for exposing injustice wherever he found it. Their eyes met briefly, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. Jonathan tucked his ID into his wallet, pulled out his phone, and made a single call. "Annalise," he said when his executive assistant picked up. His voice was even, composed. "Get the board on the line, emergency session, and tell corporate counsel to start drafting a statement." Annalise hesitated for half a beat. She knew him well enough to recognize the quiet storm brewing under his measured tone. "Yes, sir," she said. Jonathan ended the call, sliding the phone back into his pocket. He turned once more to look at the grand facade of Sterling Financial, the sun catching the bold silver letters that now seemed hollow, laughable. They had thrown out the man whose investments accounted for nearly 15% of the bank's total managed assets. They had humiliated the founder of Ellis Holdings, one of the largest private investors in the state, without so much as glancing at his name. And they were about to find out exactly what that mistake would cost them. Jonathan Ellis, businessman, visionary, and now, unwillingly, the center of a story about power, prejudice, and reckoning, walked calmly down the sidewalk, the city's morning hum swallowing him up. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to argue. The weight of the truth, once set in motion, would roar louder than anything he could have said at that counter. And Sterling Financial was about to hear it. Inside the cool, gleaming walls of Sterling Financial, the morning buzz continued, oblivious for now to the storm gathering just beyond the glass. Heather Carter smoothed her blazer with a sharp tug and returned to her station, assisting the next customer with a tight smile. Michael Reeves disappeared back into his office, the blinds swinging slightly as he pulled the door shut behind him. The world inside the bank tried to resume its polished rhythm, but something in the air had shifted, subtle, uneasy, waiting. It didn't have to wait long. Less than an hour later, a sleek black Tesla Model S pulled up to the curb. The car barely slowed before the driver stepped out. Annalise Parker, crisp in a navy suit, her expression set and purposeful. She didn't wait for valet. She didn't glance at the curious looks thrown her way by passers-by. She strode through the entrance with the sharp authority of someone who had cleared bigger battlefields than this. Behind her came two other figures. Thomas Gray, legal counsel for Ellis Holdings, and Rebecca Mills, the firm's chief communications officer. Three people, all moving with the kind of synchronization that turned heads before their names ever did. Heather glanced up from her desk just as the doors opened. Her practiced smile faltered. Michael, watching from his glass-walled office, stiffened visibly. Annalise didn't approach the counter. She walked directly toward the center of the lobby, heels clicking sharply against the marble, and with a soft but commanding voice that carried to every corner, she said, "May I have the attention of the branch manager, please?" Heads swiveled. Conversations dropped. Even the security guard, Sean, who had leaned casually against the wall after ejecting Jonathan, straightened uncertainly. Michael opened his door slowly, forcing a bland smile onto his face as he approached. "I'm the manager," he said, voice tight, cautious. "How can I help you?" Annalise extended a hand, businesslike. "Annalise Parker, representing Ellis Holdings." You may also recognize Mr. Thomas Gray, our legal counsel, and Miss Rebecca Mills from Public Relations. Michael's face paled slightly. He opened his mouth, but Annalise continued, smooth and unyielding. We're here on behalf of Mr. Jonathan Ellis. The name struck the room like a dropped glass, silent, then explosive. Several tellers turned to stare. A couple of customers paused mid-transaction, sensing something important unfolding. Michael's Adam's apple bobbed once. Mr. Ellis? Annalise's smile was thin, almost polite. The man you denied service to this morning. The man you had escorted out like a criminal. The man who, incidentally, owns enough of your bank to call an emergency shareholder meeting at any time he chooses. Heather's hand, still holding a pen, trembled slightly. A bead of sweat slid down Michael's temple. We're here, Annalise continued, to begin that process. Thomas Gray stepped forward, holding up a sheaf of papers neatly clipped together. Effective immediately, he said, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. Ellis Holdings is withdrawing all deposits, all investment accounts, and severing all institutional partnerships with Sterling Financial. The weight of his words dropped into the room with finality, like a verdict. Michael gaped. Wait, you can't just... We can, Thomas said flatly. We are. Rebecca Mills, the communications officer, added softly, and you'll be pleased to know that as of 15 minutes ago, national media outlets have been notified. Expect inquiries by noon. Michael looked around the lobby, desperation flashing in his eyes. The customers who had been pretending not to listen were now openly watching. Bones were subtly raised. The story was already slipping out of his grasp, bleeding into the world beyond these marble floors. But there must have been a misunderstanding, Michael stammered. Surely we can, Annalise raised a hand, silencing him without a word. Her voice, when she spoke again, was low, measured, devastatingly final. The misunderstanding, she said, is believing that you could treat a man differently because of the color of his skin and face no consequences for it. Michael's mouth opened, then closed. Behind him, Heather stood frozen, her complexion ashen. Annalise took a step closer, her presence radiating steel beneath silk. You didn't just insult a client today. You insulted a legacy. You insulted a man who built an empire in a world designed to shut him out, and who still chose to invest his trust, his wealth, and his reputation into institutions like this one. She let the words settle, watching as Michael's shoulders sagged under their weight. You don't deserve him, she said simply. Across the lobby, Sean the security guard shifted awkwardly, his face bright red. He opened his mouth as if to apologize, then thought better of it and looked away. Annalise turned toward the glass entrance. Pack your things, she added over her shoulder. The corporate office will contact you shortly. Without waiting for a response, she, Thomas, and Rebecca exited the building with the same precise authority with which they had entered. Outside, Jonathan Ellis stood waiting near the curb, his arms folded loosely, his expression unreadable. As Annalise approached, she offered him a small nod. He returned it with a slow, easy smile. A smile not of triumph, but of quiet, hard-earned justice. Behind the tinted windows of the lobby, Michael slumped against the counter. Heather sank into her chair. Customers whispered behind raised hands. The once pristine Sterling Financial brand had been punctured from the inside out, and no amount of damage control would be enough to save them now. Jonathan turned his face slightly toward the morning sun, feeling its warmth brush across his skin. There was no need for speeches, no need for drama. The truth had spoken louder than he ever could. He slipped on his sunglasses, straightened his sleeves, and walked slowly down the sidewalk. Not rushing, not retreating. Just moving forward, as he always had. One man against the world once. Now, a man the world had no choice but to recognize. The fallout was swift and unforgiving. By noon, headlines had flooded financial news outlets and social media alike. Sterling Financial accused of racial profiling by CEO of Ellis Holdings, major funds withdrawn amid scandal, executives under scrutiny after incident with billionaire businessman. Within 24 hours, Sterling Financial's stock had plummeted by 15%. Investors were demanding emergency meetings, and the board of directors convened behind closed doors, desperate to contain the firestorm. Michael Reeves was placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Heather Carter quietly resigned the following morning, her name already blacklisted among reputable firms. Sterling Financial hastily issued a statement expressing regret over the unfortunate misunderstanding and pledging immediate reforms. But the words rang hollow against the reality of what had transpired. The footage recorded by customers in the lobby had already gone viral, sparking national conversations about the subtle but insidious ways bias still poisoned professional spaces. But Jonathan Ellis said little. He attended no press conferences. He gave no angry interviews. Instead, 3 days later, he appeared at a youth entrepreneurship summit he had quietly sponsored, standing before a crowd of young, bright faces, many of whom looked like he once had. Hopeful, underestimated, hungry to be seen. In a calm, steady voice, he addressed them, not with bitterness, but with resolve. "Power isn't about how loudly you can shout in a boardroom," he said. "Power is about standing tall when others expect you to bow. It's about knowing your worth even when the world pretends not to see it. And most of all, it's about changing the rules, not just for yourself, but for everyone who comes after you." His words carried not the weight of anger, but the gravity of history, of quiet battles fought behind closed doors, of dignity that refused to be dismantled. As the event ended and applause filled the room, Jonathan stepped outside into the crisp fall air. The late afternoon sun dipped low behind the skyline of Dallas, casting a golden glow across the buildings. He walked slowly down the street, hands in his pockets, head held high. No security. No entourage. Just a man at peace with the storm he had weathered and the new horizon he was helping to shape. Across the country, millions who had never heard of him before now knew his name. But Jonathan Ellis didn't walk for their recognition. He walked for every door that had been slammed in his face and every door he would now leave open behind him. If this story resonated with you, we invite you to like this video, share it with others who need to hear it, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel to follow more true stories of resilience, dignity, and change. Thank you for being part of this journey.